He owned half the skyline, but no one looked him in the eyes. On a cold New York morning, Daniel Reyes stood at the edge of his penthouse window, staring down at the city that whispered his name in boardrooms but never in warmth. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Investors, partners, headlines, but not a single message that began with "How are you?" He had built an empire out of discipline, precision, and a heart he'd locked away so tightly even he had forgotten the key. Love had once tried to reach him. Years ago there had been someone, soft laughter, patient eyes, the kind of presence that made silence feel like music. But Daniel had been too busy, too driven, too convinced that success would fill every empty space. When she left, she didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply said, "You'll have everything, Daniel, just not the one thing that makes it worth having." He had dismissed it then. Now, standing alone above millions of lives, her words echoed louder than any applause. Downstairs, his mansion functioned like a machine. Staff moved with quiet efficiency, each person trained to be invisible. Meals appeared without conversation. Rooms stayed immaculate without acknowledgement. It was a system built to ensure Daniel never had to depend on anyone. And yet somehow, he had never felt more dependent. On noise, on work, on distraction. That morning, something unusual happened. A tray clattered. It wasn't loud, but in a house so accustomed to perfection, it felt like thunder. Daniel frowned and made his way to the kitchen. The staff froze as he entered, eyes lowered, back stiff, silence immediate. Except for one. A young woman stood near the counter, clearly shaken, a few pieces of broken porcelain at her feet. She looked up, not fully but enough, and said softly, "I'm sorry, sir, I'll clean it right away." Daniel waited for the usual fear, trembling excuses. But there was something else in her voice. Sincerity. "What's your name?" he asked. The question startled the room. "Maria," she replied after a brief pause. He nodded, then surprised even himself by saying, "It's just a plate." She blinked as if unsure she'd heard correctly. "It's just a plate," he repeated, then turned and walked away. But something lingered. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt seen, not admired, not feared, but acknowledged in a quiet human way. Maria hadn't tried to impress him. She hadn't rehearsed her apology. She had simply been real. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed her more. Not in a deliberate searching way, but in the small details, the way she greeted other staff with a gentle smile, the way she worked with care, as if every task mattered, the way she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. It was unfamiliar. One evening after a particularly brutal day filled with negotiations that felt more like battles, Daniel came home later than usual. The house was dim, quiet. As he walked past the dining area, he saw a single light still on in the kitchen. Maria was there, cleaning. "You're still here?" he asked. She turned, surprised, then nodded. "Just finishing up, sir." He hesitated, then stepped inside. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Humming." She smiled faintly. He leaned against the counter, studying her in a way he rarely studied anyone. Not for advantage, not for judgment, just curiosity. "You don't seem afraid," he said. Maria paused, choosing her words carefully. "I respect you, sir, but I don't think fear is the same as respect." The sentence landed deeper than she intended. Daniel looked away, processing. "No one has said that to me before." "Maybe no one thought they could," she replied gently. There was no challenge in her tone, no defiance, just truth. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Daniel didn't feel offended. He felt relieved. That night, he didn't go straight to his office. He sat in the living room, the silence no longer as oppressive, replaying her words. Respect is not fear. When was the last time someone respected him? The days began to change, slowly at first. Daniel started coming home earlier, not always, but more often. He found himself lingering in spaces he used to pass through, asking questions he used to ignore. Maria never overstepped. She remained professional, distant in the way someone knows their place in a rigid world. But she never treated him like a monument. She treated him like a person. One afternoon, Daniel returned unexpectedly and found Maria sitting at the edge of the kitchen table, reading a worn book. She stood up immediately when she saw him. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just—" "What are you reading?" he interrupted. She hesitated, then held it up. It's just a novel. Sit, he said. She blinked. Sir? Sit, he repeated, softer this time. Reluctantly, she did. What's it about? He asked. Her voice warmed as she spoke. It's about a man who loses everything, but finds happiness in the simplest things. Daniel almost laughed at the irony. Does he get his old life back? He asked. She shook her head. No, he realizes he doesn't need it. The room fell quiet. Daniel looked around. The marble, the glass, the perfection. And for the first time it felt excessive. What do you think happiness is? He asked suddenly. Maria thought for a moment. Feeling like you matter to someone, she said, and knowing they matter to you. It was such a simple answer, and yet it unraveled something inside him. Because for all his wealth, Daniel couldn't name a single person he truly mattered to. Not anymore. Weeks passed, and the shift became undeniable. Daniel began treating his staff differently, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent changes. Learning names, saying thank you, listening. At first it made people uncomfortable. Then gradually, it changed the atmosphere of the house. But the real change was within him. One evening he asked Maria, "Why are you always kind?" She seemed surprised by the question. "Because I know what it feels like when people aren't," she said quietly. He studied her, sensing there was more beneath the surface. "Tell me," he said. She hesitated, then spoke. "I grew up in a place where people struggled every day. Kindness wasn't common, but when it appeared, it meant everything. It made hard days feel lighter. It reminded you that you weren't invisible." Invisible. The word struck him like a mirror. Despite his fame, his power, his influence, Daniel had never felt more invisible in his own life. And suddenly, he understood something profound. Maria wasn't just kind, she was intentional. Her kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. A few days later, Daniel did something no one expected. He canceled a major deal. Investors were furious. Headlines questioned his judgment. His advisors warned him of consequences. But Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because, for the first time, he had made a decision not driven by profit, but by purpose. That evening, he found Maria in the kitchen again. "I did something today," he said. She looked up. "Was it good?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But it felt right." She smiled. "That usually means it was." He exhaled as if releasing years of pressure. "Maria, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you respect me?" The question hung in the air. She considered it carefully. "Because I see who you're trying to become," she said. "Not just who you've been." Daniel felt his throat tighten. No one had ever said that to him. No one had ever believed in his potential to change. Not like this. That night, Daniel didn't sleep much. He thought about his past, his choices, the people he had lost. He thought about the version of himself he had buried under ambition, and he made a decision. The next morning, he gathered his entire staff. They stood in the grand hall, uncertain, whispering quietly. Daniel stepped forward. "I've spent most of my life building something I thought would make me whole," he began. "But I was wrong." The room was silent. "I built success, but I forgot about people. I forgot about kindness. I forgot about what it means to truly live." Daniel announced something unprecedented. Better wages, education support, healthcare, opportunities for growth beyond the walls of his mansion. But more than that, he promised respect, real respect. Some staff members cried. Maria stood in disbelief. Maria watched quietly from the back. When it ended, Daniel approached her. "She changed everything," he said. She shook her head. "You did?" "No," he insisted. "You reminded me who I was supposed to be." There was a long silence between them. Then Maria said something that would stay with him forever. "Sometimes the richest people are the ones who have been the poorest in love," she said. "But that means they have the most room to grow." Months later, Daniel's life looked different, not smaller, but fuller. He still ran his businesses. He still made decisions. But now, there was balance. There was connection. He reconnected with people he had lost. Not all of them returned, but some did, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Daniel stood by the window again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Maria was there, finishing up her work. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "No," he said. "I finally have something better." She smiled. "What's that?" He looked at her, then out at the city. "A life where I matter, and so do others." The skyline hadn't changed. The city still buzzed, but Daniel had. And in that transformation, he discovered something simple, yet extraordinary. Love isn't something you earn through power or success. It's something you learn through kindness. And sometimes the person who teaches you that is the one the world barely notices. A maid, a quiet presence, a human heart that refused to be invisible. And in the end, that made all the difference.